And we're rolling. So welcome everybody. This is the Cloud Provider vSphere syncup meeting. And this is the second meeting we have for this Cloud Provider syncup. Today is June the 6th, 2018, and we're gonna go over a really small agenda today. We're gonna talk about the current status of the project. We're going to discuss the CI system that we're working on to start testing against the vSphere platform. And we're going to quickly discuss the SIG Cloud Provider creation and our participation in the SIG as a sub-project. Okay, let me just share my screen real quick. And there you go. Okay, so currently we have our repo created. So we have Cloud Provider vSphere. We have created a security context file as Jess Frizzell opened a PR to many of the repos under the Kubernetes org to ask us to provide a GitHub username of people that should be the point of contact for security issues in the code. So inside the security context file, there is a couple of usernames, and these are all from people actively working on the cloud provider and working at VMware. We're trying to handle this security part as much as possible inside a company, given the sensitive nature of the problem. So there's all of us that are a part of the owners file are listed here as well. So all the people in the owners file that are employed by VMware are listed in this file here. We also have reached out to the existing maintainers of the code here. That are mostly people from the storage business unit at VMware, and we asked them to approve us as approvers. So Doug McEachran and myself are being listed as approvers now. So we are part of the approvers list. We haven't reached a member status for the GitHub org yet, so we're not able to send LGTMs or OK to test to PRs yet. But we're working on that, and we're tracking that as a different item in order to be more to be more fluid in the development phase of the cloud provider vSphere, which hasn't actually started yet. We are at a point where we have an outstanding pull request open that I just created about 5 hours ago, where there's an initial repo layout for the repository. I've worked with the people in the Cloud Provider OpenStack. I've asked for suggestions and some counseling on how to make this repo work. They do have a very good example in the repos, so I tried to lift as much as possible of the code from them. And I was able to get to a point where we have an initial CCM, so the Cloud Cluster Manager, working. So it hasn't been tested in any shape or form. I just tried to run it, and it's working. But it say that the initial build phase works. It compiles, and it seems to be working properly. It just requires a lot of testing right now, and that testing currently is manual. So right now there's this outstanding PR, which is a little large for my likings, but this is kind of like an initial commit in the repo, so feel free to review this. And if you're watching the recording, this might be actually merged when you watch this recording, but nonetheless, please take a look at what's in there. And there's a lot of supporting files here, so not so much code to review, but more like what the repo is going to look like once this is merged. I'm waiting for OK to test, where there's actually no testing involved because we don't have CI jobs running yet. But this is another thing we're going to work on this week. So if you're watching this recording, please reach out on the channel on Slack and see if we can help out with creating these CI jobs. So right now we have, speaking of CI, we have Tide configured. So we have the jobs that are currently pending here. They're not really running anything because we have to create the jobs themselves, but we have the integration set up. So once this PR has been merged and we have code that we can actually test and build and check for linting and formatting and unit testing, we can actually start creating CI jobs. And the CI jobs for unit testing and building the actual image that has to be tested end-to-end can be done using the infrastructure that Google gives to Kubernetes to test and run and build those jobs. In order to create those jobs, we have to send a pull request to Kubernetes test infra repo. I do have some examples that I also got from the OpenStack people, so thanks a lot for that. So if there's anybody willing to help out with creating those jobs, reach out, because this is probably the next step once this PR is merged. And going forward, what we have is we have to get ready for actually running end-to-end jobs against the vSphere infrastructure. So as I mentioned during the SIG-VMware call, we have some capacity reserved on AWS. So we have vSphere clusters on AWS that we're going to use to run CI jobs against. Once we figured out how to make that capacity available in the Tide pool, we're going to start using it to run end-to-end tests against the vSphere environment. So we're going to test end-to-end the cloud provider vSphere. This is still a work in progress. We are actually discussing in SIG-VMware if there's a need or there's a will to create a working group, given that CI on vSphere right now is kind of being neglected. There's no vSphere testing being done in the Kubernetes community as of today. And given that we have this capacity and we have about 4 engineers working on this to get up to speed and get this capacity ready, we were wondering if having a working group that can work across various SIGs, like SIG testing, even SIG networking, or SIG storage as well, where we can test CSI plugins against vSphere or NSXT and so on. And that will include, obviously, the cloud provider vSphere portion. So we're going to discuss that at the next meeting tomorrow, the VMware SIG meeting, which is, just to remember everybody, it's 11 a.m. Pacific tomorrow on Thursday. So if you're interested in that and you're attending and you're watching the recording, please attend tomorrow. Last thing on the agenda is discussing the new SIG cloud provider that has been created last week. So to recap a little bit on that, the working group that is currently working on cloud provider wanted to graduate to a SIG. So this new SIG cloud provider has been created. So a charter and proposal has been put forward in the past weeks. We as SIG-VMware reviewed the proposal and accepted the proposal. Part of this proposal is for SIG cloud provider to own and oversee all the code that is tied to a specific cloud provider. This includes not just the cloud providers themselves, like vSphere, OpenStack, AWS, GCP, and so on, but also the code that lives inside Kubernetes and is the interface for the cloud providers. So the purpose of the SIG is to oversee this work and have multiple sub-projects under it, each one of them representing a specific vendor for that cloud provider. We agreed at moving under them long-term, but the SIG has been established just last week, so there are no meetings are not scheduled yet. There are some of the things in the SIG that are still missing. So we haven't figured out what's the transition going to look like.
Now, I think there's an existing cloud provider working group. Is that going to be deprecated then because the SIG exists?
Yeah, I think the cloud provider will graduate to a full-blown SIG. This
Okay.
is the plan.
So that one already has scheduled meetings.
Yeah, which is,
they erroneously have two duplicate ones, but
yeah, the meeting is actually scheduled right after this one, which is, you know, at 10 a.m. Pacific. So I'm going to attend that meeting shortly, and there's probably going to be some discussion around what's the plan going forward, if the meeting is going to stay at the same time and day, if it's going to change to bi-weekly, we don't know yet. So we still have to figure that out.
I'll see you at that meeting too.
And once we figure out what the transition is going to look like, then we'll figure out how to move and transition the code and the ownership from SIG-VMware to SIG Cloud Provider. But this is not something that we'll do this week or next week. This is something that requires some thoughts. Actually, I think there are some issues that have to be ironed out, specifically with SIG AWS. There's some back and forth on some issues. So it's not something that will be done shortly, but it's definitely the plan long term. It's going to be to have a SIG cloud provider overseeing all the cloud providers.
So can I ask you this on the vSphere cloud provider? From what I've been observing going on over in the storage SIG, the usual method of doing this is to first start with a proposal doc, and then after that gets checked into GitHub, move on to the actual implementation and writing code. Is our plan to do something like that, or are we just going to jump in there and start coding?
There is actually a PR out on the Kubernetes community website for a KEP, so Kubernetes Enhancement Proposal, that regards this cloud provider vSphere. The only problem here is that the process around this is not clear, not 100% clear. But I can pull that up and tell you what the problem is here. Here, basically, what we have is we have some sort of problem with process. So the official process right now tells you that you have to have a Kubernetes enhancement proposal in order to create a subproject, for example. And in our case, this is a subproject, right? So so this is what I did. I created a KEP, which is right here, where SIG-VMware participates to this project, to the Cloud Provider Controller Manager project, and we have a KEP under SIG-VMware called Cloud Provider Transition, and we have a summary of the work that we're going to be doing on the cloud provider.
Okay.
This was supposed to be the entry point for this subproject, but when I confronted myself with the people in the community, apparently this rule is brand new and people are not familiar with the process. So we thought about just creating the subproject without actually having this KEP merged. And given that this was submitted when the SIG Cloud Provider work was still in flux, we thought that this would be, superseded by the SIG Cloud Provider work. In fact, if you look at the KEP now, here in the repo, you'll see that there's a SIG Cloud Provider folder here, and inside the SIG Cloud Provider, they're now owning the KEP that is related to the Cloud Provider transition out of 3 and into the Cloud Controller Manager.
Okay.
So I think that PR will just go stale, and we'll probably be closing that soon.
Could you put a link? I want to just look at it. Could you put a link to it in the meeting notes?
Absolutely.
Maybe to both of them, aren't the vSphere one and the Cloud Provider one?
So this is the new CCM KEP, and then we have this one here. Okay. And yeah, that's pretty much the current status of the cloud provider vSphere. So I think we're very ahead of what we were supposed to be at this point. So because 1.11 hasn't shipped yet, and we would put our we put our roadmap originally as starting right after 1.11 has shipped, but given that they moved the release date out to end of June, I think we're a little bit ahead of time, which is fine. I think right now at this point, if you want to contribute in some way to the project at the current time, will be to just test this PR. So build this PR and test it on your vSphere platform and see if there are any major bugs that will and file bugs against that prototype here in the repo, so we can triage them and start working on them. And the plan for 1.12 is to ship the CCM with a one-to-one feature mapping with the one that is still sitting in tree, and for 1.13 is to deprecate the one that is in tree right now in Kubernetes and move everybody to this new CCM here. And yeah, that's all I have for the status for this week. You guys have any questions?
Sounds good. No questions from me.
Cool. Okay, so I guess we can call it a day, and I'll put the recording up so people can see that and share that in the channel.
Okay, bye.
Okay, bye everyone.